What happens when a tiny island in the Atlantic openly defies the most powerful empires on Earth? In the early 1700s, Nassau transformed from a backwater into a lawless republic where pirates ruled, merchants bargained with thieves, and governors were powerless. But how did this fragile haven survive against Spain, France, and even Britain itself? Until it didn't? The story of Nassau isn't just about ships and treasure. It's about how ordinary seamen carved out their own society and how empire crushed it. Let's see why Nassau terrified kings yet inspired legends. Picture a low island rising from calm waters, its coastline broken by narrow inlets and shallow harbours. The sandbars guard against deep-drafted warships, leaving only smaller craft able to slip through. You hear the lap of waves against wooden hulls and smell the salt thick in the air. This is Nassau in the early 1700s, unremarkable if you charted it on a map, yet about to become the heart of a story that unsettled nations. The geography made it a natural refuge. The harbour stretched wide enough to anchor dozens of vessels, but its entrances confounded foreign navies. Ships unfamiliar with the waters ran aground before they ever saw the shore, while smaller pirate sloops darted safely inside. With no stone fort of substance, only scattered cannon on half-ruined platforms, Nassau was a port without real protection. Yet it offered exactly what wandering sailors sought. The colonial authorities who claimed the Bahamas were weak, often distant, sometimes absent altogether. Governors were appointed but rarely provided with money or manpower, and the settlement itself lacked reliable defences. In those neglected years, the island faded from the priorities of the crown and slipped into obscurity. That very neglect was what made it valuable, for as soon as attention turned elsewhere, opportunists began to arrive. A place overlooked by authorities does not draw order, but it does draw those looking for freedom to act without constant oversight. The puzzle was this: how could a scattering of ramshackle houses and a half-forgotten harbour grow powerful enough to trouble global powers? The answer began with war, and the sudden silence that followed. For over a decade, the War of Spanish Succession had employed privateers, sailors armed with legal licenses to raid enemy shipping. They gained skill, ships, and a sense that plunder could be honourable if sanctioned by a royal seal. Yet when the peace treaties were signed in 1713, thousands were left jobless overnight. A commander one day, a criminal the next. What awaited them was idleness, poverty, and the memory that fortunes once came quick with cannon fire. Many refused to return to poverty. They pointed their ships toward weakly guarded waters and sought survival in the seizure of merchant cargo. Nassau, quietly isolated and forgotten, opened its arms whether by design or accident. Another door had already been closed elsewhere. Port Royal in Jamaica, the notorious wickedest city on earth, had been swallowed by earthquake and sea in 1692. Its destruction forced displaced raiders to scatter, searching for a new hub. Some tried mainland havens, others small islands, but only a few spots matched the ease and natural fortifications that early Nassau offered. Crews began to drift there with their prizes, finding a welcome anchorage and other crews eager to exchange news, labour, and coin. In that moment, the island began to transform, gathering not just ships, but the energy of a displaced seafaring world. Merchants too had a role in the tale. Unable to secure predictable trade routes and missing the protection of regular navy patrols, many colonial traders faced the impossible choice of ruin or compromise. A pirate port could be both enemy and partner. Capture meant potential loss, but voluntary trade promised surplus goods at reduced prices. Picture the harbour once again. A suspicious merchant ship inching toward the quay, its captain casting wary glances toward the blackened flags raised nearby. At shore, taverns filled with barrels of sugar unloaded under false names, tobacco bales stacked high, silver coins scattered onto rough wooden counters. The stench of rum clung to the air, while much of Europe's wealth passed through hands already bloodied by theft. In those crowded rooms, it was nearly impossible to tell legal cargo from stolen, and soon No one bothered to ask. All of this prospered under defective governance. With no steady oversight, the colony became both community and refuge, a place where order was remade by those excluded from empire. It seemed accidental at first, a gap left by weak defences, shifting economies, and defeated navies. But as the years passed, the pattern became clear. Geography provided shelter, politics looked away, and restless sailors filled the vacuum. The rise of Nassau was more than coincidence. It was the inevitable aligning of forces that created an outlaw capital. But a refuge was not enough to keep it alive. The pirates had to decide how to live together, how to divide, and how to rule without kings or governors. The story turns now from place to people, how men who answered to no monarch built for themselves a republic at sea. Imagine a city without a king, where hands were raised to decide who commanded, and treasure was portioned out by contract rather than decree. Step aboard a pirate ship anchored in Nassau's sheltered harbour, its deck crowded with men listening to articles read aloud. The words were simple, scratched out with ink on paper made fragile by sea air. They told each man what share of booty he could expect, how disputes would be settled, even what punishment awaited a thief among them. These codes, known as articles, were agreed upon at the start of a voyage, signed or marked by every crewman. They spoke of fairness, of rights, of collective control, in an age where most sailors elsewhere had no choice but blind obedience. At sea, monarchs and admirals ruled with whips and rope, yet here ordinary men raised their voices in rough democracy. You might think such a gathering would collapse into noise, but order was secured by consent. Captains were not crowned for life, they were chosen, and they could just as swiftly be deposed. Leadership came from skill, daring, or charisma, but at any moment, if the crew judged the captain reckless, greedy, or cowardly, they stripped his command. The quartermaster, second in power, acted as balance, guarding supplies and keeping the captain from sliding into tyranny. Beneath them, each man had a vote that carried equal weight. It startled outsiders. In lands shaped by absolute kings and rigid hierarchies, pirates appeared as enemies of order. Yet within their floating world, their system engendered a stubborn kind of stability. Consider the division of wealth. Loot taken from merchant hulls was not claimed wholly by captains. Instead, it was spread by agreement. Every crewman received a share according to the articles. Sometimes injuries earned compensation. An arm lost in battle might bring more coin as recompense. Captains and quartermasters gained slightly larger portions, recognition of their roles, but no man could seize majority for himself. Contrast that with the Navy sailor working for wages so low that payment might arrive years late, if at all. For the pirate, risk promised immediate reward, with corruption minimized through transparency. You can almost hear the clink of coins poured into communal chests, counted beneath the lantern's glow, divided with an authority more binding than fear. Mutual trust, anchored by written pact. On these ships, power was never absolute. Even a figure like Blackbeard, with his smoke-darkened beard and eyes meant to unnerve, remained hostage to the will of his men outside of combat. His ferocity at sea created loyalty in the heat of pursuit. But once the guns cooled, every sailor remembered the right to speak. If discipline faltered, strength of fear alone could not guarantee command. At Nassau, this collective spirit multiplied. Crews from different vessels mingled on the wharf, argued in dark taverns, shared supplies, and abided by overlapping codes. Each ship's articles varied, but the essential idea of equality remained constant. On land, it fostered rough cooperation across crews that otherwise held no allegiance. The paradox was clear. To enemy traders and colonial commanders, pirates seemed the embodiment of violence and cruelty, torching ships, terrifying captives, leaving ruin across seas. Yet look inside their community and you find rules, votes, and contracts forming the foundation. It was a society that rejected kings and governors not by accident, but by preference. The same men who plundered for a livelihood shaped one of the most democratic experiments of their century, if only in miniature form. Their system sent tremors through observers, who saw in it not just defiance of law, but the terrifying prospect of ordinary, unlanded men governing themselves. This tension defined Nassau's republic. It was neither a chaotic mob nor a gentle utopia, but something in between, a fraternity of equals who seized their rights through force, then safeguarded those rights among themselves through consensus. That blend unnerved empire. Brutality on the seas could be stamped out by warships, but an alternate form of governance, however crude, threatened the established order. Picture again that line of men in the harbour, shouting their assent, deciding by voice alone how spoils would scatter. No king dictated, no law decreed, and though governed by violence beyond their circle, inside it they practiced a discipline of choice. Nassau became more than a hideout. It was a political experiment tightening its grip with every ship that dropped anchor. What flourished there carried the echo of republics yet unborn, whispering possibilities that monarchs could not tolerate. But this fragile democracy required constant sustenance, the promise of coin, food, and supplies to keep it alive. Without treasure coursing through its markets, the republic could not stand, and so the question turned to livelihood. How did Nassau, adrift in empire's shadow, feed its daring democracy? The answer lay in the ruthless economics of plunder. Step into Nassau's streets in the early 1700s, where the air is thick with wood smoke and the sour tang of rum. The marketplace hums with barter and noise. Piles of sugar sacks lean against rough wooden stalls. Barrels of tobacco roll across cobblestones, and shards of gemstones glimmer faintly in the shade of a canvas awning. These